Level 1. The bail jumper. You post bail on a minor charge, and instead of showing up for your court date, you just don't go. No dramatic escape. No plan. Just a decision to not be there when your name gets called. This is where the story usually starts, because failing to appear converts a minor charge into something the system takes far more seriously than the original offense. A warrant gets issued the same day, and if the original charge involved federal jurisdiction, or the failure to appear itself becomes a federal matter, the U.S. Marshals Service inherits the case because fugitive apprehension is their primary mission, more than any other federal agency. This is specifically what they exist to do. At this level, the investigation is almost entirely paperwork-driven. A deputy marshal pulls your last known address, your employer, your vehicle registration, and your known associates from existing databases before ever leaving the office. Most bail jumpers at this level aren't hiding especially well. They're just going back to their normal life and hoping nobody follows up. That assumption is usually wrong. Deputies working these cases describe the majority of low-level fugitives as findable within days, simply by checking the 2 or 3 places any reasonable person would guess first: home, work, and family. The Marshal Service prioritizes these cases differently than people expect. A low-level bail jumper isn't treated with the urgency of a violent fugitive, but the sheer volume of these warrants, tens of thousands active at any given time across the country, means deputies develop an efficient, almost routine process for clearing them. Many of these cases resolve not through a dramatic arrest, but through a phone call to the fugitive's own attorney, who often convinces a client to simply turn themselves in once it's clear the warrant isn't going to quietly disappear on its own. Level 2. The parole abscond. You cut off your ankle monitor or simply stop reporting to your parole officer, and now you're not just wanted. You're a known quantity who deliberately broke a specific documented agreement. This changes the marshal's approach considerably from Level 1, because a parole file comes with years of documented history, known associates, family relationships, past addresses, and behavioral patterns collected across your entire time under supervision. Deputies working abscond cases treat this file as a roadmap rather than a blank search, because someone who's been monitored for years has left a much richer trail than a first-time bail jumper ever does. The Marshals Service runs dedicated fugitive task forces in most major metropolitan areas, specifically built around this kind of case. Regional teams combining deputies with local and state officers who know a specific area's geography and community networks intimately. These task forces work through a structured process, reviewing the absconder's full file, interviewing every listed associate in person rather than by phone, and cross-referencing utility and employment records against the addresses those interviews turn up. Most absconders get caught within the first few weeks, specifically because breaking parole doesn't erase the relationships and habits documented in years of prior supervision. Interviewing associates in person, rather than by phone, matters more than it might seem. A phone conversation gives someone time to think through an answer and decide what to withhold. An unannounced visit at someone's home or workplace, deputies who work these cases explain, often produces an involuntary reaction, a glance toward a back room, a specific hesitation before answering a simple question that reveals more than the actual words spoken ever could. This is a deliberately low-tech method, surviving inside an otherwise increasingly digital investigative process precisely because it still works as reliably as it always has. Level 3. Unlawful flight across state lines. Once you cross a state border to avoid prosecution, the case shifts entirely into federal territory, because unlawful flight to avoid prosecution is itself a federal offense, giving the Marshals Service clear jurisdiction regardless of what the underlying state charge was. This is where financial tracking becomes central to the investigation. Deputies request records showing recent card transactions, bank withdrawals, and any financial activity in the days immediately following your disappearance. Because most fugitives at this level haven't had time to fully plan a life without their existing financial identity. A single debit card swipe at a gas station 3 states away can narrow an entire search radius from a multi-state area down to a specific town within hours. Cell phone data compounds this considerably. Even a phone that's been powered off pings the last tower it connected to before shutting down, giving investigators a starting point, even when a fugitive believes they've gone completely dark. Task forces working these cases treat the combination of a financial trail and a cell tower ping as the single most reliable starting point available, because both require the fugitive to make an active mistake to avoid. And most fugitives, under the pressure of actually being on the run, make that mistake within the first week. There's a specific psychological pattern deputies describe seeing repeatedly at this level. Fugitives who've never had to actually disappear before consistently underestimate how much of daily life depends on leaving a traceable footprint. Buying groceries, filling a prescription, contacting a family member to check on a pet. Each of these ordinary acts performed without thinking, because they've never had to be avoided before, becomes exactly the kind of data point investigators are trained to look for. The skill of actually staying hidden turns out to be considerably harder than most people assume, until they're forced to practice it under real pressure with real consequences for every small mistake. Level 4. The violent offender with prior. A documented history of violence changes the marshal's entire approach to a case, because at this level, the priority shifts from simple location to safe apprehension. Finding you is only half the problem once your file shows a pattern of resisting arrest or escalating to violence during prior encounters with law enforcement. Deputies handling these cases build a far more detailed profile before ever attempting contact, incorporating psychological assessment, known weapon access, and documented behavioral triggers from prior arrests. Surveillance at this level runs longer and more cautiously than at earlier levels, watching a location for days rather than moving immediately on the first sighting, specifically to understand your daily routine well enough to plan an approach that minimizes risk to both the arresting team and any bystanders who might be present. The Marshals Service's National Fugitive Task Forces, combining federal, state, and local resources, prioritize cases at this level specifically because a violent fugitive still at large represents an ongoing public safety risk rather than simply an open warrant. Coordination with local police becomes essential, since local officers often have the most current intelligence about a specific neighborhood's activity, even when the fugitive believes they've moved somewhere unconnected to their previous life entirely. Risk assessment at this level extends beyond just the fugitive's own history. Deputies also evaluate the specific environment where an arrest is likely to occur, accounting for factors like whether children or other bystanders are typically present at a given location, and what time of day would minimize the chance of an uncontrolled encounter. This planning process can add days or weeks to an operation that, from a pure location standpoint, could technically move much faster, because the priority at this level has genuinely shifted from speed to safety for everyone involved, arresting officers and the fugitive included. Level 5. The sex offender registry violator. Failing to register or update your address as required under state and federal sex offender registration laws creates a specific category of fugitive case, one that draws dedicated attention through federal statutes, specifically criminalizing registration violations that cross state lines. The Marshals Service runs specific operations dedicated entirely to this category, sometimes conducting sweeps that check registered addresses across an entire region within a compressed time frame, specifically to identify violators quickly, rather than case by case. These operations combine database cross-referencing, comparing registration records against current utility accounts, employment records, and vehicle registrations with physical verification, sending deputies to confirm addresses in person, rather than relying solely on paperwork that might be outdated or deliberately falsified. Community tip lines play an outsized role at this level, compared to some others, because registration violations often come to attention through a neighbor or community member noticing that someone no longer lives at their registered address, or noticing an unregistered individual
matching a known profile in a new location. The public nature of registry information, controversial as it remains in broader policy debates, functions here as a direct investigative tool that leads the Marshals Service doesn't have to generate entirely on their own. Cross-jurisdictional coordination adds a specific complication to this category of case that many others don't share. Registration requirements, timelines, and specific violations vary somewhat by state, meaning a violator who's technically compliant in one jurisdiction's rules might be in clear violation the moment they cross into a state with stricter requirements. Deputies working these cases have to maintain detailed knowledge of exactly how registration law differs across whatever states border their working territory. Since a fugitive's entire strategy sometimes depends specifically on exploiting exactly this kind of jurisdictional inconsistency. Level 6, the multi-state fugitive. Once a fugitive has been documented moving through multiple states, evading capture for months, the case escalates to involve the Marshals Service's Investigative Operations Division, which coordinates complex, longer-running fugitive investigations, requiring resources beyond what a single regional task force typically handles. At this level, deputies build a comprehensive behavioral profile drawing on every piece of information gathered from the case's entire duration. Patterns in which types of towns the fugitive gravitates toward, whether they've shown a preference for using specific types of temporary work to generate cash, and any consistent method used to avoid identification, such as consistently using aliases that follow a recognizable pattern rather than being fully randomized. Genetic and biometric databases increasingly play a role at this level too. Fingerprints taken during an unrelated minor arrest under an assumed name processed through federal databases have led to the identification of fugitives who successfully evaded capture for months using an alias simply because routine processing procedures for even minor charges include biometric checks against national databases that don't care what name was given at booking. Behavioral profiling at this stage draws increasingly on data analysis techniques that would have been unavailable to earlier generations of fugitive hunters. Some task forces now use predictive modeling that analyzes a fugitive's documented history, hometown, family ties, past employment sectors, even climate preferences inferred from where they've previously chosen to live, to generate a ranked list of likely relocation destinations. Narrowing a nationwide search into a much smaller number of higher probability regions before deputies ever commit resources to searching any specific one of them directly. Level 7, the most wanted. Being placed on the Marshals Service's own most wanted list, reserved for the most serious and highest priority fugitives, brings a combination of resources unlike anything at the levels below it. Dedicated case agents, coordinated media campaigns generating public tips, and often a reward specifically structured to incentivize the exact kind of ordinary citizen tip that ends most high-profile fugitive cases. Aerial surveillance becomes a standard tool at this level, particularly in rural or heavily wooded search areas where ground teams alone would struggle to cover the necessary territory efficiently. Thermal imaging technology deployed via aircraft can identify a heat signature through forest canopy that ground searchers might walk past entirely. And canine units trained specifically for tracking work alongside these aerial resources, following scent trails that aircraft alone can identify a general area for, but can't pinpoint precisely on their own. Task forces at this level also lean heavily on informant networks built over years of working fugitive cases in a specific region. Deputies who've spent a career working the same geographic territory often maintain relationships with individuals who, for a variety of reasons, ranging from financial reward to personal grievance, provide information leading directly to a fugitive's location. Information that no amount of technical surveillance could generate independently. Media coordination at this level is treated as its own specialized discipline rather than an afterthought. Deputies work directly with local and national news outlets to time the release of specific details, a photo, a location where the fugitive was lost, confirmed seen, a description of a vehicle for maximum public visibility during the periods when tip.
Escaping across international borders doesn't end a fugitive investigation. It simply shifts the process to international cooperation through extradition treaties and organizations like Interpol. Even when authorities know exactly where a fugitive is, legal and diplomatic procedures can delay their return for years. Long-term fugitives may believe they've disappeared forever, but advances in DNA analysis, facial recognition, and forensic technology continue reopening cold cases and uncovering new leads decades later. In the end, most fugitive investigations don't conclude with dramatic chases. They end because of one small mistake: a financial transaction, a phone signal, a trusted associate's tip, or a routine police encounter. Investigators rely on patience, persistence, and the gradual collection of evidence, while fugitives must avoid making mistakes every single day. Whether a case lasts days or decades, the outcome often depends on one simple reality: investigators only need to be right once, while a fugitive must remain perfect forever.